The wind was cold that morning, biting through the glass walls of the tall skyscraper that overlooked the city. Inside the corner office, Ethan Cole, the youngest and most talked-about CEO in the country, stood in silence, staring down at the streets below. His suit was perfect, his schedule busier than ever, and his world looked flawless from the outside. But behind the confident smile and the endless meetings, Ethan carried a quiet emptiness, a void carved by grief, guilt, and memories he tried so hard to bury. 3 years ago, he had lost the love of his life, his wife, Anna, during childbirth. The pain had broken him in ways success never could repair. Since that day, Ethan had poured every ounce of his being into his work, building his empire higher and higher, as if money and control could protect him from pain. His little daughter, Lily, now 3 years old, was the only light in his life. He adored her, but even then, work often stole his attention. Most of Lily's time was spent with her nanny, Maya, while Ethan tried to be the father he thought he should be from afar. That day, however, something unexpected happened. A sudden emergency meeting was cancelled, and Ethan, for the first time in months, decided to pick Lily up himself from the park where her nanny often took her. He arrived quietly, wearing sunglasses and a tailored coat, trying to go unnoticed. But what he saw when he reached the playground stopped him in his tracks. There, sitting on the grass beneath the big oak tree, was Lily. Her tiny hands were holding a small paper flower, and in front of her sat a woman, frail, thin, and wearing a worn-out coat. Her face carried lines of hardship, and her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and unspoken pain. Yet, there was warmth in her smile, the kind that made even strangers pause. Lily was laughing, a genuine, joyful sound Ethan hadn't heard in weeks. And the woman was gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind Lily's ear, her expression filled with tenderness. Ethan's first instinct was suspicion. Who was this woman? Why was she near his daughter? He started walking briskly toward them, but before he could speak, the woman looked up, and for a moment, Ethan froze. There was something hauntingly familiar in her eyes. The woman rose slowly, her voice trembling as she said the words that would make Ethan's heart stop. "I used to be your wife's nurse. Redheart, if you believe in kindness, fate, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Silent Hope. Your support helps us keep creating stories that touch hearts and heal souls." Redheart. The world seemed to blur for a second. Ethan's mind raced back to the hospital room 3 years ago, the sterile lights, the beeping monitors, the final moments before his world fell apart. He remembered the chaos, the desperate doctors, the soft-spoken nurse who had stayed beside Anna until the very end. But in that fog of grief, he had barely looked at her face. Now, standing before him, that same woman looked completely different. Life had not been kind to her. Her clothes were faded, her hands rough, her shoes barely holding together. Yet the quiet dignity in her posture was unmistakable. She introduced herself softly, "Grace Miller." Ethan felt his throat tighten. You were there?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Grace nodded. "Yes, Mr. Cole. I was with Anna during her final hours. She was so brave. She talked about you and your baby until her last breath." Ethan's heart ached at the mention of Anna's name. The sound of it alone felt like reopening a wound that never healed. He looked at Grace again, this poor woman who had once been part of the most painful chapter of his life. "Why are you here?" he asked. Grace looked down, her eyes glistening. "Life didn't go the way I hoped," she said. "After the hospital closed, I couldn't find steady work. My husband fell ill, and I spent everything on his treatment. When he passed, I lost my home. I sometimes come here to rest, to watch the children play. It reminds me that there's still innocence in the world." Her voice broke, and Ethan felt something stir deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion. Humanity. The cold CEO who measured every minute in profits suddenly saw beyond the numbers. He looked at his daughter, happily showing Grace a small toy she had brought. There was a purity in that moment, a bridge between two souls that had both known love and loss. Over the next few minutes, Ethan sat down beside them, surprising even himself. They talked, quietly, gently, as Lily giggled between them. Grace told him stories about Anna that he had never known. How she used to hum lullabies to her unborn baby, how she would talk about building a garden after the birth, how she believed Ethan would be a wonderful father. Every word felt like a thread stitching his heart back together. When Lily grew tired and dozed off in his lap, Ethan looked at Grace and asked the question that had been burning inside him. "Why didn't you reach out? I would have helped you." Grace smiled faintly. "You were grieving. And I didn't want to bring back the pain. I thought, maybe you'd moved on." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. For years, he had been trapped in guilt, convincing himself he could have done more for Anna, for their child, for everyone. Yet here stood a woman who had once been a silent witness to his loss, now carrying her own pain quietly, without bitterness. That evening, Ethan drove Grace to a nearby diner. He ordered food for her, and as they ate, she told him more about her life, how she sometimes volunteered at a shelter, helping others despite having so little herself. Ethan listened intently, realizing that Grace was the kind of person his wife had always admired, kind-hearted, humble, and selfless. When he dropped her off near the shelter where she sometimes stayed, Grace smiled warmly and thanked him for his kindness. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said softly. "But maybe God wanted this meeting to happen, for both of us." Ethan couldn't shake those words. The next morning, he called his assistant and instructed her to find Grace Miller's records. Within days, he learned the full story, her years of service, her spotless reputation, and her downfall after the hospital's closure. It wasn't fair, he thought. Someone like her deserved dignity. So, without telling her, Ethan arranged something quietly. A few days later, Grace received a letter from the Cole Foundation, offering her a position as a senior caregiver at a new children's rehabilitation center, fully funded by Ethan's company. The salary was generous, the benefits substantial. When Grace showed up to thank the manager, she learned that Ethan himself had requested her by name. The next time they met, it was at the center's opening ceremony. Grace was wearing a simple but clean uniform, her hair neatly tied back. When she saw Ethan holding Lily, she smiled through tears. "You gave me my life back," she said. Ethan shook his head. "No," he replied quietly. "You reminded me what life is really about." That day marked the beginning of something new, not just for Grace, but for Ethan too. He started spending more time with his daughter, learning to leave work early just to read her bedtime stories. The walls of his mansion no longer echoed with silence. Lily's laughter filled every room. And sometimes, when the weight of the world felt heavy, Ethan would visit the center and sit in the garden with Grace, talking about Anna, about life, about kindness. Grace often told him, "Your wife would be proud of you." And for the first time in years, Ethan began to believe it. Months passed, and the center flourished. Children found healing there, parents found hope, and Grace became like a guardian angel to everyone who walked through those doors. She poured her soul into her work, and her gentle compassion inspired others. Ethan, now transformed from a grieving widower to a compassionate leader, realized that his success was not in the profits he made, but in the lives he touched. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Ethan sat on a bench watching Lily play in the garden, this time with Grace beside her, helping her water the flowers. The same oak tree that had once witnessed their first meeting now stood as a silent symbol of fate and redemption. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. "You know," he said softly to Grace, "when I saw you that day in the park, I thought life was punishing me again. But now I realize, it was giving me a second chance." Grace smiled. "That's how grace works," she whispered. Sometimes it comes when we least deserve it. Ethan nodded, his eyes moist. The city lights began to shimmer, and a soft wind rustled through the leaves. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace, not the kind that comes from success, but the kind that comes from forgiveness, understanding, and the quiet power of human connection. He looked at his daughter, at Grace, and whispered a silent thank you, to fate, to kindness, to the memory of the woman who had brought them together. Red Heart, if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Silent Hope. Every comment and reaction helps us continue spreading stories of love, loss, and second chances. Red Heart. Speech balloon. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what moment in this story moved you the most? Ethan Cole's story became more than a tale of loss. It became a reminder that no matter how broken we feel, kindness can find us again, often through the most unexpected people. And sometimes, the ones who walk into our lives quietly, with nothing to offer but compassion, end up giving us everything we didn't know we needed. Because in the end, success fades, power shifts, and wealth comes and goes, but love, kindness, and second chances? They last forever.